Tom was driving home on a cold evening with bags of groceries in the back seat and his son's favorite snacks on the passenger seat because he had promised to make a movie night, and he always kept his promises, especially now, since it was just the two of them after his wife had passed away 2 years ago, and every little thing he did was for his son. The road was quiet and empty, and the sky was turning dark as he drove past tall trees and quiet houses with lights in the windows, and for a moment he felt at peace, like the world had slowed down just for him. But then something strange caught his eye up ahead. There was a car swerving across the road, moving fast, and while like the driver had lost control or something was very wrong, and Tom's heart started racing as he slowed down and kept his eyes on the car that now looked like it was heading straight for the trees. Without thinking, Tom pulled over and jumped out his car yelling for help even though no one was around, and he ran toward the wreckage where the car had slammed into a tree and steam was rising from under the hood and everything smelled like smoke and metal. Inside the car, a woman sat slumped over the wheel, her face covered in cuts and her hands shaking as she tried to move but couldn't, and Tom called out to her asking if she could hear him, and she turned her head slowly with tears in her eyes and a look of fear that hit Tom straight in the heart. He reached in through the broken window and gently tried to open the door, which was stuck, but after a hard pull it opened, and he helped her out slowly and carefully because she was hurt and weak and could barely walk, and he kept talking to her to keep her awake while they waited for the ambulance to arrive. As he wrapped his coat around her shoulders, he noticed something strange, something small and shiny hanging around her neck, a necklace with a blue stone in the middle shaped like a teardrop and wrapped in a silver frame, and for some reason it looked familiar to him in a way that made his stomach twist. He had seen that necklace before, or at least something just like it, and his mind started racing back to old photos of his mother back when she was young, wearing a necklace that looked almost the same, and he remembered touching it as a little boy and asking her where she got it, but she always gave the same answer, that it was special, and that was all. Now this stranger was wearing the same thing or something nearly the same, and the questions began to swirl in Tom's head faster than he could stop them. Who was this woman, and why was she here, and how did she get a necklace that looked exactly like the one his mother used to wear before she died when Tom was only 10 years old? The woman was shaking and barely speaking, and all she said was thank you again and again as tears rolled down her cheeks, and Tom just held her hand and said it was okay and that help was coming soon and everything would be all right. But in his heart he knew something strange was happening, something he couldn't explain, and that necklace was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to something bigger, something hidden, something from the past that was about to come back. The ambulance arrived with flashing lights and loud voices, and they took the woman away on a stretcher, while Tom stood there staring at the ground and holding the broken door of her car as the sound of sirens faded into the night. He didn't know her name, or where she was from, or why she was on that road at the same time as him, but he knew one thing for sure: this was not just an accident, and their paths had crossed for a reason. That night Tom couldn't sleep, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the necklace glowing in the dark, and the woman's face looking back at him, and somewhere deep inside, he felt a connection he couldn't explain, like fate had pulled him into something he wasn't ready for. He picked up an old photo album, the one with pictures of his mother from long ago, and he turned each page slowly looking for that one photo, the one where she wore the necklace and smiled in a way that made everything feel warm and safe. When he found it, he stared at the picture, and then at the image burned in his mind from earlier, and the more he compared them, the more certain he became that the two necklaces were the same, or at least connected somehow. He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew the truth was coming, and it all started with a crash on a quiet road, and a necklace that should have stayed lost, but somehow found its way back to him through the hands of a stranger. And in that moment Tom made a silent promise to himself and to the woman he had saved that he would find out who she really was and what the necklace meant and why it had come back now after all these years. Because something was waiting in the past, and it was time to uncover it. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the sound of the rain tapping against the window, and in that silence Tom stood by the bed looking at the woman he had pulled from the crash just hours ago and wondering who she really was and why fate had brought her into his life. She was asleep with bandages on her arms and a bruise on her forehead, and her face looked pale under the soft light. But even in this state, she had a calm presence, like someone who had carried pain for a long time and was used to it. Tom didn't want to leave, but visiting hours were almost over, and the nurse told him she would be okay for now, and that he should get some rest too, because he looked tired and worn out like he had been carrying a heavy weight all day. But just as he turned to go, he heard her whisper something soft and shaky, and he turned back to see her eyes half open looking at him with confusion and fear and something else he couldn't name. "Where am I?" she asked with a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in days. "You're safe," Tom said gently. "You were in a car crash, but you're going to be all right now." She looked around the room slowly, and then at her hands, and then down at her chest where the necklace still hung shining softly like it had its own light, and then she touched it carefully, as if it was the only thing she recognized. "Do you remember anything?" Tom asked. "Do you know your name?" She looked at him with tears forming in her eyes, and shook her head slowly, and said, "No, I don't remember. I don't know who I am." Tom felt something twist in his chest, because he could see the fear in her eyes, and the pain of not knowing, and it made him want to help her even more, not just because he had saved her, but because he felt like he was meant to find her. He sat down in the chair beside her bed, and said, "It's okay, you don't have to remember everything right now, just rest and take your time, but if there's anything at all that comes back to you, you can tell me." She nodded slowly, and held the necklace in her hand tighter, and closed her eyes again as if trying to find pieces of her past inside the darkness. That night Tom went home, but he couldn't sleep because the image of her face and the necklace wouldn't leave his mind, and he kept thinking about the photo of his mother wearing something so similar, and the story she never told him about where it came from. In the morning he returned to the hospital with the old photo in his jacket pocket and 1,000 questions in his heart, hoping maybe she would remember something when she saw it, or at least feel something familiar. She was awake when he arrived, sitting up in bed and staring out the window, and when she saw him she smiled a little like she was happy he came back even though she didn't know who he was. "I brought something," Tom said. "Maybe it will help." He took the photo out and handed it to her, and she looked at it carefully, her fingers trembling as she held it, and then her eyes widened, and she brought her hand to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I know her," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I know her." "That's my mother," Tom said. "She passed away many years ago, but you're wearing the same necklace she used to wear. I saw it in this photo. When I was a kid, I never forgot it." She stared at the picture again, and then looked down at her necklace, and something about it made her start to cry, quietly, like a memory was trying to come back, but couldn't fully reach the surface yet. Tom sat beside her again and said, "Maybe you knew my mother, maybe you were friends, or maybe even family. Do you remember her name?" She shook her head slowly and whispered, "I don't know, I just feel like I knew her, like I was close to her." The nurse came in to check on her and said the doctors had found no ID in the car, no phone, no purse, nothing that could tell them who she was, and that it was strange because most people carry something, but this woman had only the necklace. Tom felt a chill run down his spine because it didn't feel like a random crash anymore. It felt like she had been on her way to find someone, maybe him, maybe his family, and something had stopped her just before she got there. As he left the hospital room, he looked back at her one more time and saw her staring at the photo again like it held a key she couldn't quite turn yet, and he knew deep down this was only the beginning. The woman with no name was not just a stranger, she was part of something bigger, something hidden, and he was now a part of it too. Tom could not stop thinking about the woman in the hospital, and the necklace that tied her to his mother, and the photo that made her cry even though she said she had no memory, because something in her heart remembered even if her mind did not, and that feeling would not let him rest. He sat at his kitchen table late at night, staring at the photo again, his hands shaking a little as he held it, and memories of his mother filled his head, her voice, her laugh, her warm hugs, and that same necklace shining in the sunlight, while she smiled down at him when he was just a little boy. He thought about the stories she never told, the way she avoided questions about her past, and how she would change the subject whenever he asked about family, or where she grew up, or why she never talked about her parents or siblings. Now it all made sense, or at least it started to, and there was only one person left who might know the truth, someone he had not spoken to in years, his mother's older sister, Aunt Carol, who lived 3 towns away, and who used to visit when Tom was small before she suddenly stopped showing up one year, with no explanation. The next morning Tom got in his car and drove to Aunt Carol's old house, a small yellow place at the end of a quiet street, with wind chimes on the porch and roses by the mailbox and memories of childhood visits that came rushing back as soon as he pulled into the driveway. He knocked on the door and waited, heart pounding, unsure if she would even remember him or want to talk, But when she opened the door and saw him, she smiled with surprise and said, "Tom, is that really you? My goodness, you look just like your mother." He told her about the woman, the crash, the necklace, and the photo, and how the woman said she did not know who she was, but cried when she saw the picture of his mother. And Aunt Carol's face changed, her smile faded, and her eyes looked far away, like she had just seen a ghost. "I was wondering when the past would come back," Aunt Carol said softly, and she invited him inside and sat down in her old armchair with her hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was holding something in. Tom sat across from her and asked her the question he had been holding in his heart since the moment he saw that necklace. "Aunt Carol, did Mom have a sister?" There was a long pause, and then a deep sigh, and Aunt Carol nodded slowly and said, "Yes, your mother had a sister. Her name was Evelyn, and she disappeared a long time ago. Before you were born, we were told never to speak of her again." Tom felt a chill run through his body because he already knew the answer before she even said it. And the woman in the hospital, the woman with no memory, could be Evelyn, the missing sister, the one erased from the family. Aunt Carol looked down at her hands and began to tell the story one Tom had never heard before about how Evelyn had fallen in love with a man their parents did not approve of, and how it caused a terrible fight between the sisters, and Evelyn left and never came back. They searched for her for a while, but then gave up, and the family moved on, or tried to, and when Tom's mother had him, she made a promise to leave the past behind and never speak of Evelyn again, not even to her own son. Tom listened to every word, feeling like pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place, and he asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't anyone?" "Because your mother was hurt and ashamed," Aunt Carol said. "She felt like she lost her best friend, and she blamed herself for what happened. She didn't want you to carry that pain too." Tom pulled out the photo again and showed it to Aunt Carol, who looked at it for a long time, and then nodded slowly and said, "Yes, that's Evelyn's necklace. Your mother had one too. They were a matching pair from our grandmother. They each took one when they were teenagers and swore never to lose them." And now that necklace had returned, not on his mother, but on a woman with no name who looked just like the girl in old pictures, and cried when she saw her sister's face. Tom left Aunt Carol's house with a storm inside him, his thoughts spinning with questions and memories, and a growing feeling in his chest that the woman in the hospital was not just a stranger, but his family, someone who had been lost and forgotten, but not gone. He drove straight to the hospital, ready to tell her everything, to show her the truth, and help her remember who she was, and why she had come, and maybe together they could bring the pieces of the past back into the light where they belonged. And as he walked into her room and saw her looking out the window, holding the necklace in her hand, he knew something had already changed in her eyes, something quiet and deep like a memory, slowly waking up after years of sleep. Tom stood quietly at the hospital room door, watching the woman as she touched the necklace, gently, her eyes full of thought, like she was trying to reach into a memory that was just out of sight. And as he walked in, she looked up at him and gave a small, tired smile that felt both familiar and far away. "I talked to someone," Tom said softly. "I think I know who you are." She blinked slowly and weighted her fingers, still holding the necklace like it was the only thing keeping her grounded, and Tom sat beside her and placed an old photo on her lap, the same one he had shown her before, but now, with a second one next to it, a photo of two young girls wearing matching necklaces, smiling under the sun. "That's my mother," Tom said, "the one on the right, and the other girl, that's her sister Evelyn. She disappeared before I was born, and no one ever spoke about her again, but I went to see my aunt, and she told me everything, and I think you're Evelyn, I think you're my aunt." The woman stared at the photo for a long time, her hands trembling slightly as she looked from one face to the other, then down at the necklace, then back again, and her lips parted like she was about to say something, but the words were trapped somewhere deep inside her. "I remember a swing in the backyard," she whispered. "I remember her voice calling my name. I remember running through tall grass, and the sound of laughter. I think it was her. I think it was your mother." Tom felt tears building in his eyes, because he knew now that it was true. This woman was not just a stranger or a victim of a crash. She was family lost to time and silence and pain, but found again in the most unexpected way. He told her the whole story, everything Aunt Carol had shared about the fight and the man, and how the family turned their backs, and how his mother had carried the sadness like a quiet shadow for the rest of her life, always pretending it was gone when it never really was. The woman closed her eyes and let a tear fall down her cheek, and she said, "I remember his name. His name was Daniel, and I loved him so much. But they said he was not good enough. They said I had to choose between him and my family, and I chose love, and then I lost everything." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and Tom reached out and held her hand gently, and she looked at him with so much sadness in her eyes, but also something else, something like relief, like a heavy door had finally opened. I tried to find her, the woman said. I tried to come back, but every time I got close I stopped myself, because I was scared she wouldn't forgive me, scared she would hate me for leaving. And when I finally decided to go see her, it was too late. She was already gone. Tom squeezed her hand and said she never hated you. She kept your photo all her life. She wore that necklace until the day she died, and when I asked about it, she said it was special, and now I know why. The woman smiled through her tears and said, I'm sorry, I don't remember everything yet, but what I do remember feels real, and it feels like home, and if I really am Evelyn, then that means you're my family, and I can't believe I finally found you. They sat together in silence. For a while hands joined, hearts open, and the soft hum of the machines around them seemed to fade as a new connection slowly formed between them, stronger than the years apart, stronger than the pain and silence. The next few days brought more memories, little pieces returning like raindrops filling an empty cup, and each time a new one came, the woman grew stronger, more herself, and Tom stayed by her side through it all, watching his aunt return one memory at a time. One morning a nurse brought in a small bag that had been recovered from the crash site, tucked beneath the passenger seat, and inside was an old journal, a faded photo, and a letter with Tom's name on it written in careful handwriting. Tom held it in his hands for a long moment, unsure what it would say, but knowing deep down it held the final piece of the puzzle, the last part of the story no one had ever told him. And as he looked up at Evelyn, she nodded slowly, like she already knew what was inside. You should read it, she said. It's time you knew everything. And as Tom opened the letter, with shaking hands he felt the past and the present come together like two sides of a broken picture, finally finding their match. The family they tried to hide was never truly gone, just waiting in the shadows for someone brave enough to look back and listen, and Tom knew now that he was that someone, and that this story was not ending, but just beginning. Tom sat in the hospital chair, holding the letter in both hands, afraid to open it, but knowing he had to, because this letter was meant for him, written before the crash, before the rescue, before the truth came spilling out, and now it was time to read the words that had waited in silence for so long. The paper was old and soft, folded neatly and carefully, like it had been kept close and safe, and the handwriting was beautiful, a little shaky, but full of care and feeling, and at the top it simply said, Dear Tom. Tom took a deep breath and began to read each word slowly, each line touching something deep in his heart, and as he read, Evelyn watched him quietly from the bed, her eyes full of sadness and hope and a kind of fear only the truth can bring. Dear Tom. If you are reading this, then somehow this letter found its way to you. I don't know if you will believe me or even want to hear from me, but I need to try. There is something I have carried in my heart for many years, something you have a right to know. Tom paused for a moment, his throat tightening, his fingers pressing the edges of the paper like it might fall apart, and he kept reading with his heart beating louder than before. You were just a baby when I saw you for the first time. Your mother was holding you in her arms, and you were smiling so much. I wanted to come closer, but I couldn't because too much had happened, and I was afraid I had already lost the chance to be in your life. The truth is, your mother and I were very close when we were young. We did everything together. We shared secrets and dreams and promises. But everything changed when I fell in love with someone our family didn't accept. His name was Daniel, and he was kind and strong, and he loved me with all his heart. Our parents were angry, and they told me to choose. I made the hardest choice and left to be with him, thinking someday things would get better. But life didn't go the way I hoped. Daniel and I had a child, a little girl. She was beautiful and full of life. But she got sick, and we lost her when she was only 3 years old. After that, Daniel left, and I was alone and broken and full of regret. I wanted to come back home. I wanted to say sorry, but I was too ashamed, too scared. And then I heard that your mother had a baby, that she had you, and something in my heart lit up again, because I still had family. I still had you. But when I finally found the courage to reach out, your mother was gone. I missed her by just a few months, and I cried for days because I had waited too long. That's when I wrote this letter. I wanted you to know the truth, even if I never got to say it in person, even if you never found me. You are not just my nephew. You are a part of my heart. You are my second chance at family. And I hope that one day you will forgive me for staying away." Tom finished the letter with tears rolling down his face and hands shaking, and he looked up at Evelyn, who had tears in her eyes, to her lips pressed together tightly, as if she was holding back everything she had ever wanted to say. He stood up, walked over to her, and handed the letter back to her gently, then sat beside her and took her hand into his own. "I don't know everything," Tom said. "I don't have all the answers. But I believe you, and I forgive you, and I think Mom would have too." Evelyn began to cry softly and reached out to hug him, and for the first time in many years, she felt like she was home, like her broken heart had found something strong to hold on to. The nurse came in and quietly left a small plastic bag on the table, saying it had just been found in the wreck under the dashboard, and inside was something else unexpected, a second letter, this one unopened, and addressed not to Tom, but to someone else. The name on the envelope made Tom freeze. It was addressed to Daniel. He looked at Evelyn, and she looked at the letter with wide eyes, and whispered, "I didn't know it was still there. I was going to send it. Before the crash, I was on my way to find him." Tom picked up the envelope slowly and turned it over, and he felt the weight of all the years and all the silence pressing down on this one small paper, with one big question. Was Daniel still alive? And if he was, would he want to hear from her? The story wasn't over. Not yet. There was still more to uncover, and the next chapter was already waiting to begin. The letter to Daniel sat on the table between them like a quiet question with no answer yet, and Tom looked at it, then looked at Evelyn, whose face was full of worry and hope and something else, something deep, like unfinished love, still burning after all these years. "Do you want to find him?" Tom asked gently, and Evelyn nodded, slowly, her hands clasped together, as if in prayer, and her voice soft and small like a child. "I need to try, I need to see if he's still out there, and if he ever thought of me." Tom spent the next few days searching for any trace of Daniel, using old records, online searches, and even calling small-town offices in places Evelyn remembered from her past. And each time he found a dead end, Evelyn would smile and say, "It's okay, maybe he doesn't want to be found, maybe this is enough, just knowing I tried." But Tom didn't stop, because he felt in his heart that this story needed to be finished, not just for Evelyn, but for his mother, for the little girl they lost, and for himself, because he had lived his whole life with only pieces of the truth, and now he wanted the whole picture. On the fourth day, he made a call to a small bookstore in a town 3 hours away, a place Evelyn once mentioned in her memories. And when he asked for Daniel, the voice on the phone went quiet, then said, "1 moment, please," and Tom's heart skipped a beat. A new voice came on the line, an older voice with a gentle tone, and when Tom said his name and explained who he was, there was silence on the other end, and then a soft reply, "I know who you are. I've waited a long time for this." Daniel agreed to meet them the next morning at the bookstore, and when Tom told Evelyn, she cried not from fear, but from something else, something like peace beginning to grow in her chest. And Tom could see in her eyes that no matter what happened next, she had already found a kind of healing. They drove together in quiet roads, passing trees and hills and small houses, and Evelyn held the letter in her lap the whole time, running her fingers across the envelope like it was a treasure, and Tom kept glancing at her, hoping this meeting would bring her the closure she had waited for all these years. The bookstore was small and cozy, with books stacked in windows and soft music playing inside, and Daniel was standing near the front door with silver in his hair and lines on his face. But when he saw Evelyn, he smiled a smile full of memory and sorrow and love that had never truly died. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her legs still weak, but her spirit strong, and she said his name softly, "Daniel." And he said hers, "Evelyn," and for a moment no one moved. They just looked at each other like two stars that had finally found their way back into the same sky. Then they hugged, not fast, not tight, just long and quiet and full of everything words could never say, and Tom stood nearby, watching this moment that felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. They sat together for hours talking about the past, the mistakes, the heartbreak, and the daughter they lost, and Evelyn gave Daniel the letter, and he opened it right there and read every word with tears falling slowly down his cheeks. And when he finished, he said, "I never stopped loving you," and Evelyn smiled and said, "I never stopped hoping." As the sun began to set, they stepped outside, and Tom took a photo of the two of them together, a new photo to go beside the old ones to remind them that some stories don't end, they just change and grow, and sometimes the people we lose come back in the most unexpected ways. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn continued to heal her body, stronger, her heart lighter, and she moved into a small home near Tom and his son, and every Sunday they would sit together on the porch, talking, laughing, sharing memories, and creating new ones. The necklace she wore now shined brighter in the sunlight, not because of the silver or the stone, but because of a life it had helped bring back, a life full of truth, forgiveness, and second chances. And Tom no longer felt like a man missing pieces of his story, because now he knew who he came from, where his family had been, and how even broken things can be mended if you're brave enough to look back and reach out. In the end, the crash that brought a stranger into his life turned out to be the beginning of something beautiful, and the necklace that once held a mystery now held a legacy, a reminder that love doesn't disappear, it only waits to be found again.